Great to have you. Welcome, everyone. We're just starting the live stream. This will be live streamed to Facebook. That recording will be available immediately after the event. All right. So hello, my name is Dana Kuhnlein. I'm the program director for ReImagine Appalachia, and I'm joining you from cloudy Ohio, where it's a nice, balmy springtime 40 degrees. I know folks have been enjoying this lovely, warm weather. So ReImagine Appalachia, if you aren't familiar with us, is a regional coalition that promotes a shared vision for a 21st century economy that is good for communities, workers, and the land. We started in before 2020, and the first stage of our work as ReImagine Appalachia was a listening project where we went around to hundreds of folks across the region to ask them what they wanted to see for the future of Appalachia, and what we came out with was a shared vision for investments in our region that would both address our region's failing infrastructure and infrastructure needs, as well as address the climate crisis, as well as create jobs for blue-collar workers and for workers who've been historically left behind in our region. We thought that federal investments in climate and infrastructure could create new opportunities for our region, and we were correct. We fought for and we won transformative investments, and as many on this call can attest to, the region got to work creating community-led, ground-up projects with a really exciting new vision and new opportunity for Appalachia, for our workers, and for our land. And what we've seen in the last year since Trump took office is a wholesale attack on all of that. And the decades of work that went into having Appalachia be ready for the moment of this legislation passing, for having Appalachia be ready for a moment of creating hundreds of amazing projects. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. So, as a way to cope with that sense of overwhelm, and all of those changes, one thing ReImagine has been doing over the last year has been tracking this chaos. And it has felt like chaos because it was chaos. You read their briefs, they're doing it on purpose. They want it to feel chaotic. They want it to feel overwhelming. But as a way to cope with that, like I said, we have been working with our partners at Keystone Research Center and dozens of partners across the region to track the actions that have happened and the impacts that those happen. And so that's what this report is about today. It's a summary of some of that work. A little bit more background. Like I said, one of our goals is to have a record of the changes our region is experiencing. And we also want to be ready because I think we're going to have more chances. These changes are not popular. They're not even bipartisan. They're not even popular with the party that's causing them. You're starting to see those fractures. A lot of the work that we've done and we'll be tracking here has historically been bipartisan, and I think we will have a chance to change this back. I don't know when, but we want to know what was changed so we know what to fix. So just a little bit of historic context. Folks may be familiar with this, but just to get the names to the top of your head as we move into this conversation. So the IIJA, also known as the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, also known as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, became a law in November 2021. There's a little bit more about it on this slide, but it was essentially infrastructure funding. It was bipartisan, as the name says, and it had a lot of money to address climate change, clean up hazardous waste, and create a lot of jobs doing that. The Inflation Reduction Act became a law on August 2022 with the goal of reducing energy costs and a lot of pathways to help communities both update their infrastructure, clean up their communities, and create a lot of jobs. And these historic opportunities created historic action. And so what we saw in Appalachia that we tracked with the report we released in April of 2025 was that our communities were ready. Like I said, they did have a vision. These opportunities were predated by decades of work and planning and visioning. And so we saw folks in the region plan big, build big, immediately get to work. We saw $11 billion in federal investments in just those couple years that these bills were available. And those federal investments were matched by private investments. And so we saw $15 billion in private investments that were spurred by those federal investments in 2023 alone. So there's more detail on that, like I said, in that April report. But because our region was targeted for investment through those bills, that makes our region at particular risk as the Trump administration works to dismantle them. So there were a lot of incentives in the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law that were targeted to places like Appalachia because there was an understanding that over a century of disinvestment, the dramatic changes from the changing energy industry, there's been global shifts that have moved our entire planet away from the use of coal, and those had really devastating impacts on our communities locally. And so for those reasons and for others, our region was specifically targeted with a lot of tax incentives and other efforts to make sure that our communities had a chance to take advantage of these opportunities. And so we see disproportionate risk in our region because we had that disproportionate attempt at opportunity. So there's some numbers in here. Nationally, we saw closures, cancellations, and downsizes outnumber new clean energy projects from 2 to 1. Republican districts in our 4-state region were disproportionately taking advantage of climate infrastructure investments. Our region was set to create 92,000 jobs, and 67% of those projected jobs are now at risk because of the changes we'll outline on the webinar today. So in less than a year, as Diana's data will show you, we've seen historic growth switch to a flat line. You know, just to underscore that Appalachia is ready. Folks are here and they want to work and they want to build big and they have the vision and we just need a chance. And if anybody has a couple $1 billion who's listening to this today, our projects are still shovel ready. So just give us a call and we can tell you where to send that money, because those projects are ready to go, but they've had the rug pulled out from under them. Another thing to note is that a lot of the projects that came from these had community benefit plans attached to them, which made them particularly useful for ensuring that there was union labor, that there were pathways into the workforce for local workers, that communities had a voice in the types of projects that were coming their way. And so that makes a lot of these projects that we're losing, particularly, really heartbreaking, to be honest. It's been a rough year. They can't stop the long-term progress of our region, but they are definitely creating some unfortunate delays. So a little bit of specifics on that. Like I said, there's much more detail in the report, but the reconciliation bill is one of the mechanisms through which they have been dismantling all of this potential progress. That was passed in July 2025. It has a lot of names, so we'll go with OBBBA. Oh, I forgot the other side of that parentheses. It's so many B's. It's a silly name. I don't like it either, but that's what it's called. So we saw that phase down wind and solar and tax credits. That's of particular interest to the numbers you're going to see in the report, because there is a lot of passion and interest for going solar, because solar is cheaper, because it's fast. There's been a lot of short-term spending, particularly for solar, that you'll see in the reports. When we look at the long-term analyses for solar, though, we do not see that burst continuing. And so what we see right now is, and what the data will reflect, is a lot of energy for short-term projects that can be completed before the deadlines, and not a lot of energy for those longer term projects. Again, solar remains cheap and fast, so it's not going away, but we're still missing opportunities. There's a lot of confusing restrictions. I'm happy to answer questions about this, but it's called FEOC, the Foreign Entity of Concern, and it essentially turns the supply chains for renewable energy into a hot, confusing mess for anyone who's trying to actually deploy this energy. And it also was incredibly damaging to a lot of community-led projects that were funded through the Inflation Reduction Act that we'll talk about a little bit more. One of the impacts of this is an expectation that energy prices will continue to rise. We all know that data centers and AI is increasing our grid's need for electricity. And so this couldn't really be happening at a worse time to see our energy industry in the region being destabilized the way it's been in the last year. So these numbers come from Energy Innovation, and it's cited in the report, but their estimates are that of $14.5 billion of extra cost to households in our four-state region because of the changes of the OBBBA, if those aren't turned back before 2035. And again, it couldn't come at a worse time because energy prices were already going up. So we've seen, I don't need to tell anybody who pays an electric bill this, but we have in fact seen electric prices going up and energy prices going up in the past year in particular, and that is not anticipated to change. One thing the report outlines in detail that I'm going to not outline in detail for you all today is the way, so there's different mechanisms through which this attack on our communities has happened, through the bill, but also through administrative actions. Those have hit every aspect of the government. Again, this report focuses on the clean energy and manufacturing sectors impacts. And so a really big player in the energy and manufacturing sector for the U.S. is the Department of Energy. And so the report goes into some detail about the ways that the DOE has been hit by the Trump administration's changes. One, there's been erratic and chaotic changes to wind and solar permitting that creates a lot of stability and also a lot of fear for all kinds of permitting, because if this can happen to wind and solar, it could happen elsewhere. There has been more than 3,500 staff departures. Some offices like the Clean Energy Deployment, or OSED, and Grid Deployment Office saw 70% staff reduction and were then dissolved, which is legally dubious because those offices were mandated through a congressional act, a law. So the Trump administration shouldn't be able to dissolve them, but they did. They closed the interagency working group on coal and power plant communities, which is a particular blow to Appalachia. If folks aren't familiar, you've probably used their resources if you've applied for a grant in the last couple of years, because they had one of the best grant-seeking platforms for coal and energy communities. They did a tremendous amount of work for coal and energy communities, and the Trump administration dissolved them, which is really heartbreaking because the work is so needed. So if you want to learn more about some of the projects that have been canceled, this map on the screen comes courtesy of our friends at Blue Green Alliance, and that is an interactive map, and you can click on these different projects and see what's at risk in the region. But I will leave it at that. So like I said, y'all are here to see the new stuff, the data, so I'm going to hand it to Diana so we can learn about what we've learned.
Thanks, Dana. So I'm going to walk you through our findings from the report. And first, let me just say a couple words about context. This report focuses on North Central Appalachia, which includes the states of Kentucky, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia. This is the area that ReImagine focuses on. This is a region that really has been hard hit by the boom and bust of extractive industries, as well as the loss of manufacturing jobs over decades. So, federal climate and clean energy investments have brought new projects, new jobs, and really a renewed sense of hope for the region. But as Dana discussed, the Trump administration's changes in federal policy and priorities intentionally away from clean energy is blunting the potential economic rebound of our region. Next slide. So before I get into our findings, I'm going to just talk you through the two data sets that we used. The first data set I'll share findings from is the Climate Program Portal. This data source tracks climate investments from IIJA and IRA. The Climate Program Portal tracks all announced federal climate funding as well as canceled projects, divided into two categories: proposed, canceled, and confirmed canceled. So we'll get into the details of that data in a minute. The other data set we use is the Clean Investment Monitor, put together by the ReImagine Group and MIT's Center for Energy and Environmental Policy Research. This data tracks investments in the manufacturing and deployment of technologies that reduce greenhouse gas emissions, broken into three categories: the manufacturing of technologies that reduce emissions, such as solar, wind, batteries, zero emissions vehicles, the deployment of technologies, and the retail purchase of greenhouse gas reducing technologies by households and businesses. These data include both public funding and private investments. So we can see how government funding leads to increases in private investment in clean energy. And, the Rhodium MIT dataset reports and allows us to track actual spending each quarter to see how investment is changing over time. So that's different than the Climate Program Portal, which tracks announced investments. Next slide. So let's get into our findings. I'm going to start with the Climate Program Portal, which mostly shows climate-related federal grants and loans. The IIJA and IRA have awarded our four-state region about $19 billion in federal grant funding and $6.1 billion in loans, which assisted 2,635 projects in our region. Pennsylvania saw the greatest amount of grant funding, followed by Ohio. Kentucky saw by far the largest amount in loans, $3.8 billion, due mostly entirely to a loan to Blue Oval SK, which is a battery manufacturing joint venture between Ford Motor Company and battery maker SK On. Press reports just announced actually this week that this joint venture is dissolving due in part to the end of the EV tax credit and slowing demand for EVs. Next slide. The Climate Program Portal also reports that our region has seen more than $2 billion in federal climate funds confirmed canceled, which you'll see in green, and proposed canceled, which you'll see in the shades of blue in our region. Ohio leads because of $500 million canceled, which would have gone to Cleveland Cliffs, which Rika is going to talk about later. And Kentucky has seen cuts to some fairly large projects, to Ascend Elements for a battery processing plant, and PPL Corporation for a large-scale carbon capture program. Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia have all had significant funding from the Solar for All program, which is proposed to be canceled, which you'll see in the dark blue on this figure. Turning now to our fundings from the Rhodium Group and MIT's Clean Investment Monitor data. Next slide. So this chart shows federal clean energy investments nationally since 2022, which total about $167 billion in tax credits, grants, and loans. 95% of these federal clean energy investments are tax credits. Next slide. So this figure, shows federal clean energy investments in our four-state region starting in Q1 of 2022. These data show that there has been a steady rise in federal clean energy and manufacturing investments from Q3 of 2022 to Q4 of 2024. These actual quarterly investments decreased in Q1 of 2025 and started to flatline after President Trump took office. Next slide. So this figure, I think is a really important figure in our report. This shows federal plus private investments for our region going back even further to 2018. This is the real dollars spent during each quarter on retail purchases or new facility construction once a project moves into construction and installation. So as you can see, actual clean energy investments peaked in our region in Q3 of 2024 at $4.7 billion. From the 2024 Q3 peak, we see a slight decrease in Q4 of that year, and then a significant decrease in Q1 of 2025, down to $3.8 billion. From there, we see a flatlining of federal and private clean energy spending in Appalachia. Next slide. So this figure shows the same total investment by quarter as the figure before, but instead of being broken down by states in our region, it's broken down by categories of spending. So there are a couple things I want to point out. Spending in the category energy and industry, which is the dark purple color, which is, energy and industry is the deployment of clean energy technology, which in our region is 96% solar. You can see it has decreased significantly since its peak in 2024, quarter three, from 1.27 billion down to 445 million by quarter three of 2025. The retail category, which you'll see in light blue, this is the retail purchase of greenhouse gas reducing technologies by households and businesses. Looking at that last bar on the chart, you can see the retail category peaked this last quarter, and that's likely due to households and businesses taking advantage of soon to expire tax credits. Which is why you kind of see an overall uptick in spending between quarter two and quarter three of 2025. And then lastly, clean energy manufacturing spending, which is in the yellow, which is mostly batteries and EVs in our region, was close to zero in 2018, jumped to in 2023, and is substantial today. In fact, from 2021 to 2024, clean energy manufacturing investment quadrupled in our region. Investments in this category has remained pretty steady since the end of 2023. Next slide. So I'm going to deviate with this slide away from the ReImagine data just for a minute, because I want to show National Census Bureau data on private construction spending in manufacturing. This figure is different from the MIT ReImagine total clean energy investment because it only includes private spending, and it includes all of manufacturing, including semiconductors, not just manufacturing related to clean energy, which is what we've been looking at. Nonetheless, the census data corroborate at the national level what we saw on the previous figures, a completely unprecedented tripling in spending from 2021 to 2024. The concerning commonality between this figure and the last is the decline in total spending since a 2024 peak. Both ReImagine, MIT, and Census Bureau data indicate that federal policy shifts may have derailed a potentially transformative surge in private investment in sustainable manufacturing and a clean economy. Next slide. So now I'm turning back to the ReImagine data. This map shows the distribution of clean energy investments. This includes both investments that have already been spent and at-risk or outstanding investments across our region. For this map, the darker areas show a greater amount of clean energy investment. Kentucky Congressional District 2, which is Representative Guthrie's district, was in to receive by far the largest investment in the region with $9.55 billion. The potential dissolving Blue Oval SK battery joint venture may impact investments or the associated jobs. We don't have a clear picture yet. The next map shows just the outstanding or at-risk funds to congressional districts in our region. Representative Andy Barr of Kentucky 6 takes the lead with the most outstanding clean energy investments at $2.6 billion, followed by Representative Guthrie's district with $2.4 billion at risk. And Representative Carol Miller of West Virginia 1 also has, significant at-risk clean energy funds, $2.2 billion. Next slide. So now I'm going to shift to talk about the potential jobs impact of this flatlining of clean energy spending and the pullback of federal funding. This pie chart shows the total amount of jobs created since quarter three of 2022 from clean energy investments, including those that have already come to our region in the light blue and those that are outstanding in purple. This totals 92,282 jobs just in our four-state region. 67% or 2/3 of these jobs are still outstanding, which means they are potentially at risk if federal funding is pulled or projects are canceled. Next slide. This figure shows just the outstanding or at-risk funds to our four states. Kentucky and Ohio lead the region in construction and operational jobs at risk from federal funding changes. Next slide. And this final slide of mine just shows the regional distribution of jobs created and at risk due to clean energy investments. And I'll just note that the appendix to our report details investments and jobs by congressional district. And we also have a list of canceled projects in our region. So with that, I'm going to now hand this off to Rob Baer, the president of the Pennsylvania Building and Construction Trades Council, to provide his perspective on the impact of the recent federal policy shifts.
So, thank you for inviting me in today. One of the things that I look at as president of the Building Trades of Pennsylvania, but also working nationally, is the impacts of all the dismantling of the IIJA, IRA, and where we're at today. Now, look, this has been crushing to a ton of my members in the building trades across not just ReImagine Appalachia, but the United States of America. But one of the things that I've had with my national leaders and some of the meetings that I've said, and I said, look, we're doomed to repeat history if we don't learn from our mistakes. We've learned drastically that federal investments can materialize and vaporize in a matter of years. So we need to take a more pragmatic approach when the opportunities do materialize. And the reason I say that is we saw a historic investment in Pennsylvania between 22 and 24. But up until November of 2024, I didn't have any big projects for my construction members that were due to the IRA or IIJA in Pennsylvania. The money was appropriated, nothing ever got started. And what we learned was if we don't get shovels in the ground quickly, we're going to lose the funding. And that's exactly what happened. Now, we also learned that we need states to take a bigger role in deployment of these funds and getting them deployed rapidly. And in many of our areas, that didn't happen either. And that was a big problem. But I also am not the guy that's going to go, it's all doom and gloom. We do still have tax credits available for geothermal, hydro. Working with some of our state partners, we've also said, look, we can still concentrate on those areas to employ people till we see another administration change. You look at what happened just in the hydrogen space, and you can argue whether you're for hydrogen, against hydrogen, whether it's clean, whether it ain't, whether it's blue, whether it's pink, whether it's green. But at the end of the day, 8 regional hubs, which would have been transformational in moving to a clean hydrogen economy, got wiped out with a swipe of a pen. Those 8 hubs probably represented well north of 200,000 construction jobs for my members, thousands of permanent jobs, not to mention the upstream, downstream supply, gone. So I tell everybody, look, as bad as it is, it could be worse. I just yesterday had a meeting with the mine workers, and surprisingly enough, I have mines that are trying to hire people still to mine coal. We're not using it here, but we're shipping it overseas, right? And I work with my mine workers. I'm like, what's your long-term goal here? And give me your strategy. Because they're smart enough to know, look, while we're seeing this bump, it's going to end. We have to look long-term. We have to figure out a plan as we transition. And in the short term, in the interim, we still have to keep people working. We got to put food on the table. We got to put roof over our kids' heads. We got to put clothes on our back. We got to be able to fund our schools. So I'm looking at this going, okay, we had a good bump, 2022, 2023, 2024, 25, 26, 27, and 28 are going to be pretty rough. But what are we going to do now to position ourselves that hopefully 28, 29, 30, 31, we recapture all this money? Because we have learned painfully, as Diana has shown everybody on the slide, what we thought was secure, what we thought the president couldn't do, we found out that he can, and we have a Supreme Court that's allowed him to do it. And we've lost thousands and thousands and thousands of jobs, and they're not coming back anytime soon. But on the reverse side of the coin, we also have to say, okay, is there something we can do to capture some of these jobs? We know data centers and AI are coming. We know power's going up. We know the last auction yesterday closed at $333 a megawatt hour per day. Historic highs, right? Part of that is due to the AI boom. Part of it's due to we didn't build any new generation out for the last 15 years. And we've allowed our regional transmission operators to artificially deflate the amount of power on the grid. And then you compound that with the electrification that we had coming. Well, we're in a power problem. So can we shift to still manufacturing electricity and doing it safely, effectively, and help the environment? Well, there's no perfect panacea, but yeah, I think there's somewhere in there we can work on it. I've been reaching out to data center developers because many of you on this call have heard, now PJM's like, bring your own. Well, that's not that simple. Bring your own power sounds fantastic till you realize that it takes 24 to 36 months to get a gas-fired turbine. But what I explained to our data center developers who have the money is I can rapidly deploy solar immediately. I can work around the dismantling of the Solar for All program and craft bills inside our states that incentivize people that are sitting on millions of panels to deploy them on all these million square foot warehouses we have in our transportation sector and build out 3 to 5 gigawatts of solar power. Much faster than I can even put a gas-fired turbine on. So it's all about our messaging and how we're going to do this. We know that wind and solar are struggling in Washington, D.C., and that's not going to change in the next 3 years. We also know that we can do it without them if we start concentrating on state policy outside of federal policy. And I truly believe that. I'm watching it happen now. And in Pennsylvania, I'm working with Steve. We're running some packages of bills that even though the tax credits are going away, we're incentivizing solar developers to still deploy a hell of a lot of solar. It's all here, but we can't just go, oh, woe is me, we're done. No, we're not. No, we're not. There is still a ton of opportunities here. Our mission has been to provide from the building trades on an all the above energy strategy to provide good, clean, reliable baseload power for every single person in the United States of America. And we also have to say to ourselves, we've learned that we have to be able to pivot quickly and we have to deploy rapidly at the state level to combat when Washington does something crazy. And that's exactly what we're living in. When I woke up after the election, I'm like, oh God, buckle up. This is going to be bad. And we knew it was coming, right? He told everybody what he was doing. Well, it happened. It happened. But instead of going, okay, we're done. No, let's figure out quickly how we're going to create and retain these jobs. I know that in Pennsylvania, we've been working with retraining coal miners for abandoned mine and well reclamation, capping wells, cutting methane out. It was dependent on a ton of federal money. And the federal money is going away. But working with the admin, can we still come up with money in our budgets to perform our mission till the federal funds start flowing in? The answer is yes. Is it going to be as large? No. But are we still going to do it? Yes. Broadband deployment. We've been sitting arguing about broadband deployment since it first raised its specter in the IIJA, and we've done zero broadband deployment in Pennsylvania under that act. And the reason I say that is I live in a very rural area, and for me, high-speed internet was 0.5 megabit, half, right? If I'm not in my office in Harrisburg, I'm not doing a Zoom call. Just ain't going to happen. What did we learn? Okay, they're not going to do it. But can we craft state policy that says we're going to hold people accountable? And can we put state dollars in the short term? Again, yes, we can. And we also know that what's going to happen is going to happen. We know data and AI are coming. We know there's going to be a power shortage. We know there is going to be a huge push for natural gas-fired generation. But it's not going to happen tomorrow because you don't have the stuff to build it. Okay. Manufacturing, we also know, and we've been concentrating on Pennsylvania, we know that there is going to be a resurgence in nuclear power. You heard Westinghouse say by 2030, they're going to start deploying 10 new baseload AP1000s. Well, let's start really looking at the supply chain we need. Let's talk about the 6 million cubic yards of concrete it takes to build a nuclear powerhouse. And can we incentivize low carbon concrete because we know it's coming? We know we need a hell of a lot of green steel technology because as somebody that's built a nuclear powerhouse, I can tell you right now, I need an ungodly amount of rebar and an ungodly amount of steel. So we can make that pivot and say, okay, even though part of this manufacturing went by the wayside, we know this is coming. We can start incentivizing at the state levels to create these jobs and continue this mission. But we have to pivot, right? You never buy your first racehorse and get a Smarty Jones and win the Kentucky Derby. You trade up. And as I like to tell my staff, I'm to the point now I'm jumping horses every 2 furlongs to get a faster one. That's what we have to do. We take the reports, we see where we're at, we actually use the reports to our advantage to say, okay, it's dying here, but we got to do it here. But we keep those in the back of our mind that maybe when we get this next administration change, that money will come back. And we need to be prepared for it. And we need to have rapid deployment. Because one of the issues through all this, and I have talked about this from the day I took office, that $1.9 trillion that was appropriated sounded fantastic. But what we never had was an actual plan to get $1.9 trillion on the street. We didn't. We can say we did. Well, we learned painfully here in Pennsylvania, we did not. But I'm excited that we still have the ability to continue with this mission. We still have the ability to create these jobs. I don't dispute Diana's findings that 60,000 jobs are at risk, but I'm sitting here as the president of the building trades going, I feel pretty confident that across these 4 states, I can get that number down to less than 20,000 if we do this right. Because these jobs still need built. We still need power. We need AI. We need hydro. We need wind and solar. You know it has to be part of it. Because at the end of the day, after what happened on the PJM yesterday, they were 6 gigawatts short in the capacity market. Where are you getting that 6 gigawatts? Well, now, if I just told you I can't get a turbine for 3 years, there's only one place to get that. It's solar and wind. And guess what we have? A ton of solar panels still sitting. Everybody's like, can't make it work without the tax credits. Sure we can. If we shift state policy, you most certainly can still make this work. I always say, I'm not going to be a glass half empty guy. I'm going to be a glass half full guy. After 39 years in construction and being through 5 up and downs, booms or busts, living out of a suitcase, chasing jobs, we're still positioned for a resurgence in this country that has been way too long in coming. We can say that we sat on our hands. That's true. We can say that we've had experts tell us this is coming. That's also true. We also can say we ignored it. You can't ignore it anymore. You can't ignore the fact that we're facing an energy shortage. We're facing a manufacturing shortage. We're facing supply chain shortages all over, compounded with that numbnut tariff policies that are all over the map. You never know if you're going to be able to buy a hamburger even. But at the end of the day, it all comes down to one thing: jobs. Mm-hmm. Jobs. That's it. If you don't have a job, you don't have anything, right? So let's take what we learned and let's repivot and let's still create these jobs. And at the end of the day, we get the benefit of our carbon footprint. You know, I'm a farm boy. I grew up baling hay, milking cows, but you know what I learned? Sometimes you can lead a mule to the water tank, but you got to hit them between the eyes with a two before to get them to drink. Well, we're to that point. Sometimes we can hit people between the eyes with a two before. But we have this in front of us. We truly, truly do. And as bad as it looks, we can fix it. There's enough people that want to fix it. You know that old saying, nobody cares till they're feeling pain. Pain's coming. Outside of ReImagine Appalachia, look what's happening with Medicare, Medicaid. Look what's
Right.
happening with our Affordable Care Act, right? You know why 4 senators signed on yesterday to try and force that through, 4 Republican senators? Because now they realize disproportionately in their districts, their phones are going to blow up when their constituents lose health care. What do you
Right.
think is
And
going to happen when we have brownouts on the grid? They're not calling me
and
unless they're
it's all
calling saying, can you
connected.
get me a right?
Yeah.
So we have still in front of us an opportunity to take all the data that Keystone and everybody has put together, and we can rapidly redeploy where we need to be.
Right.
And I'm saying that as a guy that's built this, right? It's not easy. It's going to take a hell of a lot of work, but we can do this.
right.
And
And
when I know my coal miners are working. So am I happy what they're doing? Well, hell no, I'm not happy digging coal and sending it to India and China. But at least in the short term, those guys are having Christmas presents under the tree next week. So that does buy us some time to continue this mission of cleaning up the economy, cleaning up the environment, generating power, and creating these jobs.
right.
And from my desk, in my role, I only have one role. It's putting people to work. That's it.
Yeah.
And I heard
So,
something the other day that I want to leave you with.
mhm.
There's 3 things on 3 legs of the stool that makes everything work in this country. Number one is energy, because without energy, there is no economy. Number two is the economy, meaning, do we have everybody working? Do we have the ability to feed our children, clothe our children, put a roof over their head and send them to school? And number three then becomes the environment.
Mhm.
And you work it, crawl, walk, run, energy, economy, environment. And if we
Mhm.
stay true to that mission, we will accomplish the goals we need.
We call
But
that the win-win-win.
if we don't work it in that order, or you cut one of those legs off, has any of you tried to sit on a 2 legged stool? It doesn't work. It just doesn't work, right? Thank you for inviting me today. I know sometimes I seem a little exuberant, but I still am, because I am bullish on us being able to fix this. And I'm
No,
bullish on
it's
us
got
being
to be
able to create
said.
jobs. You know,
Mhm.
thank you for inviting me today.
Thank you for all of your work to, like you said, keep folks in jobs and to build the things. So that's exactly what we need. So I do want to make sure we have time for questions, and I want to make sure we have time to highlight a couple of the projects that are in our region that have been lost. Those exact jobs that Rob was just telling about, and these exact projects that are where the rubber hits the road. So I want to hand that over to Rika just to wrap us out, and then we'll open for questions if you want to hear more from folks. So.
Hi, I'm Rika Rothenstein. I'm a researcher with ReImagine Appalachia, and after all the data that Diana presented and Rob's analysis, I will walk you through a few case studies we have in the report. So case studies where you see how these cancellations of federal funding affect our communities. The first case study is Middletown Works. That's a steel plant in Middletown, Ohio, between Cincinnati and Dayton. It's owned by Cleveland Cliffs, and in 2024, they received a $500 million grant funding from the Department of Energy to update their furnaces. They were going to retire a blast furnace, get 2 electric furnaces, and as well as a direct reduced iron plant. That DRI plant was supposed to use hydrogen and natural gas in the steelmaking process, and it actually can run 100% on hydrogen. And those 2 electric furnaces and the DRI plant would help to significantly cut greenhouse gas emissions. Furthermore, the project would create 1,200 union construction jobs as well as 170 new permanent jobs at the steel plant. And currently, Cleveland Cliffs employs 2,500 people at the Middletown Works plant. And again, those upgrades make it a state-of-the-art facility and help to ensure the future of the steel plant. Next slide. But in 2025, Cleveland Cliffs canceled this DOE grant funding and decided not to pursue the grant upgrade. The CEO of Cleveland Cliffs gave one major reason that there was a lack of readily available hydrogen. And as Rob already mentioned, the DOE funding for the clean hydrogen hubs, yeah, some of them are definitely canceled. I believe some of them are proposed cancellations, and there would have been a Appalachian hydrogen hub with locations in Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia. So yeah, there would have been, or this causes a lack of readily available, pricely competitive hydrogen. And it just shows how those cancellations in projects and federal fundings harm these investments. So with the cancellation of the projects, we will not have 1,200 new jobs in construction and also no 170 permanent jobs. And there won't be any cut emissions. And with that, yeah, there is the plant will remain a major contributor to air pollution in the region. Butler County, that's where Middletown Works is located, has an F on the American Lung Association scorecard. Next slide, please. The next project highlights a canceled EPA community change grant to the not-for-profit Land Force. Together with PowerWorks Philadelphia, Land Force received the grant funding for workforce development in disadvantaged communities. Land Force is located in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. They offer workforce training for area residents, many of them with barrier to employment, and they provide a career pathway in land stewardship services and in wood products. And with that grant, specifically, the training regarding wood products would have been supported. Next slide, please. Initially, that grant allowed Land Force to add staff, and they purchased a US-made sawmill. They planned for a larger cohort of trainees, and with that new equipment to add training in machine operations and manufacturing skills. But in 2025, the EPA terminated that grant, and now Land Force is unable to increase their cohort of trainees, and they also don't have the capacity to adequately staff that new equipment efficiently. Sorry. The last project, or two projects I want to talk about, is solar on mine projects, one in West Virginia, one in Pennsylvania. In Nicholas County, West Virginia, they received a $129 million grant from the DOE for utility scale solar on two former surface mines. Those solar farms would produce 250 megawatts of electric power, and that's enough to service around 39,000 homes. There was a community benefit plan connected to that grant funding. Coalfield Development, that's a not-for-profit in West Virginia, would train and employ around 400 people, also focus on people from the region with barriers to employment. And portion of that funding would finance a workforce training center at the local community college. That's the New River Community and Technical College. Another project is in Clearfield County, Pennsylvania, the Mineral Basin Solar Project. They received $90 million for utility scale solar that would produce 400 megawatts of electric power, and that would become the largest solar farm in Pennsylvania, being able to service around 75,000 homes. And this project likewise had a community benefit plan and included a workforce development component. Next slide. The Nicholas County Solar Project actually did receive an initial 1.9 million for their phase one that happened under the old administration in 2024. But since then, the funding has been frozen, and the freeze happened while job fairs and coalition planning sessions had already gone underway. Likewise, the Mineral Basin Solar Project has not received any obligated funding based on usaspending.gov. So federal funding for both of those projects is currently frozen, and the future of both of those projects is unclear. I just showed you, 4 examples of how the cancellations of federal funding affect our communities. We have one more in the report. That's Sparks, a battery manufacturer in West Virginia that also lost its funding. And yeah, there will be, unfortunately, more projects that are canceled that will not get started. And ReImagine Appalachia, along with KRC, will follow the data, will follow the examples on the ground and report about those. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Rika. Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Diana. We have a little time for questions. There's been a few in the chat, but I think we addressed those. Comments from Ben on the need to diversify energy and keep up with our foreign competitors, which I broadly agree with. Notes on green energy technicians is the fastest growing occupation. You know, like Rob said, the electrons cannot be manipulated. They go where they go, and they're needed where they're needed. And so we are going to see this stuff grow, but it's kind of the speed and I think also the ethics with which are a lot of the things that are under debate. There was a question from Angela on what they're doing with the funds that have been revoked from canceled projects. I don't actually have a very good answer for that. I suspect that I don't know because the information has not been very transparent. But if anybody does have any sources on that, I know we have so many experts that join these calls and work with us. So please feel free to share any insight you have into that in the chat, and I'll certainly look into it. But I know from some recent articles I was reading that it is a bit of a legally dubious question. And then also, as I noted in the chat, and as you know, as Rika, you might have captured from some of her slides, is that a lot of the money was actually already sent out or spent. They just weren't able to finish the projects. And so I know, for example, some of the BRIC, which were flood resiliency projects that we've worked with, and that there were projects that were 3/4 done that were frozen and not allowed to finish. And so you can say that you saved, $1 million because you canceled $1 million program, but if $750,000 of the program was actually completed and already spent, then the actual savings is less. So there's a question for Rob about Pennsylvania being a purple state and Republican support. Now, I will say ReImagine is a nonpartisan organization. We do not support any one party. And we also, I will say, we work with a lot of Republicans on these issues. Broadly speaking, electricity and jobs and infrastructure are very popular on both sides of the aisle. And actually, the trends we've seen under Trump administration have been pretty surprising for us because we've had so many partnerships on both sides of the aisle. So I would probably wonder if you want to give some state strategy that is not partisan in nature, Rob, but if you do have any thoughts about, what matters to Pennsylvanians and to Pennsylvanian workers in the elections, what they're voting for and what they want to see politicians doing, I think that's the question. And folks who asked to see the report, there it is in the chat, and we will send it out to all registrants. But go ahead, Rob. What? Yeah.
I think Pennsylvania, as you see, it is, we are purple. We have a 1-vote majority in the House for the Democrats. We have a 4-vote majority in the Senate for the Republicans. But what Pennsylvania, and we just saw the report, we have one of the largest growing economies still in the Northeast. Both sides understand the importance of energy, manufacturing, and quite frankly, Pennsylvania has a Pennsylvania First policy. Now, one of the things that, we work with every day with all politicians is economic and workforce development. And one of the things that's frustrating is sometimes when you peel back the layers of the onions of these reports, there's a lot of underlying things that don't get brought up. And I will use that Cleveland Cliffs as an example. Okay. Part of that was because Cleveland Cliffs did not purchase U.S. Steel. Nippon did. That was one of the reasons why that project in Ohio didn't go. And the reverse side of the coin is less than 2 miles from my office, Cleveland Cliffs has 2 giant electric arc furnaces at a steel mill in Stilton, Pennsylvania, which has all the power they need and it's clean. And Cleveland Cliffs decided, without any warning, to shut it down and scuttle 600 steelworker jobs in a plant that was #1 for railroad rail production in the country. So I always say, when you see the reports in Pennsylvania, I take them with a grain of salt, and then I want to dig in and find out why they leave. Was it corporate raiding? And what can I then do to save those jobs and repurpose them? And that's when the Cleveland Cliffs, when they announced that closure, I didn't have Republicans screaming and Democrats screaming. I had both sides of the aisle going, wait a minute, Pennsylvania's losing 650 union jobs? Why? And that in Pennsylvania, we understand the need for the energy, we understand the need for the manufacturing, and we understand the need for the environment. So Pennsylvania is kind of like a little microcosm of the zone now in the Northeast, where it is, because it's purple. And I like to say this with all love, we have still a lot of moderates. I have the John Hines Republicans. I have the Bill Clinton Democrats, So even though there's disagreements in Pennsylvania, people understand that it comes down to, can people afford to live in their home? Can they afford their power? Can they put food on their table? And can we create jobs? And the economic and workforce development strategy revolves around those very questions.
Yeah. And I think at the end of the day, when we talk about political strategy, what people can afford and quality of life is a big part of what it comes down to. So those are all great points. Yeah. Any other questions? Rodney, I do see your note about the hydrogen hubs. I do think it's a little bit more complex than that. I think one of the biggest trends I think that we can take away for all of this is that there are always hundreds of factors by which a project lives or dies on. It's never as simple as one thing. But when you see this nationwide, whole-scale instability and uncertainty that's created when you have, as Rob said, you're jumping from horse to horse to horse. Yes, people can do that. Yes, we can pivot. Is it better to have a long-term strategy and long-term stability for folks to work in and to build on? Yes, that is a better scenario. And so you see, of all the projects we could highlight, there are so many dynamics, but the through line that you see, and when you pull it back and you look at those numbers that Diana pulled together for us and shared with us today, is that overall the instability we're seeing, it clearly shows in the trends, and it is making the playing field harder for everyone that's involved. And when it comes to historically disadvantaged communities, historically disadvantaged workers, when it gets harder for everybody, it gets even harder for us. And so that's the other thing I think that's really worth naming, is that you have these parts of the country that have been disproportionately impacted by trying to run an economy on a trampoline, and the trampoline just got a lot bouncier. So here we are. Another thing you said, Rob, is that some folks have sat on their hands through these changes, and I think that none of our partners at ReImagine have. The folks on these calls, they're not sitting on their hands. They're the folks who are getting out there and doing the work. And so we're so excited to be in partnership with you all and to figure out what is next. How do we do the work? Because our story is long. and it's not done yet. So one of the places that our conversations about our story and the region and the work we're doing that's happening next is our January strategy summit. And so I am just going to drop that in the chat. We're running out of time today, but if you want to keep talking about all these issues, this is a 2-day virtual summit. We'll have 15 breakout sessions and 3 main panels, and we're going to be talking about everything we talked about today and more, and how it all fits together. If we have any last questions, I can stay on for a minute, but I am going to call the meeting to a formal close, so folks who have to move on with their day can do so. But any last thoughts from any of our speakers, just as we round out the hour? Really appreciate you all. Go ahead, Rob. Yeah, you're good.
Keep the faith. Keep the faith. We have a simple motto. We don't ever want to lower our standards. We want to be able to bring everybody in underserved and disadvantaged communities up to our standards.
I love it.
Everybody deserves clean water, clean air, good health care, and a right to earn and provide for your family.
Yep.
That's the basic tenets of a successful society. And quit waging war on poor people, wage war on poverty. The world would be a much better place.
Mm-hmm. So even though the path is bumpy, we know where we're going, right? That's where we're going. So